We're gonna see. Get ready to see.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today.
Whatever it is,
How are we feeling?
you gotta be flexible.
We're very exciting. Thank you. We're pleased to have you folks joining us today. This is a brisk day here in Philadelphia as part of our programming celebrating Black History Month. And we want to thank our friends at Wawa for making this opportunity and our events and programs today available, including what we're about to do just now and who we are going to meet. Do you folks know who we're going to meet? Oh, very exciting. Well, I am pleased to introduce you to them. We have a couple of guests joining us today, and they are Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and Bishop Richard Allen. We're going to learn a whole lot about who these folks are and what interesting and compelling figures they are. Thank you, Ms. Harper.
Good day.
What do you like? I'll defer to you. Choose whichever seat you would like.
I would like to
Maybe
go
front
here.
and center. All right.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. All right. Thank you. Well, very excited to get this started. I've been looking forward to this today. I always love an opportunity to speak to some distinguished guests. And with that in mind, I suppose I should introduce, do you folks know Frances Harper or Richard Allen? Anybody? Oh, I hear someone recognizing the name. Well, I heard someone say they know Richard Allen. All right. Well, I suppose if we have a lot of folks who may have be curious to learn more about you two. Would you like to tell us just a little bit about yourselves? Whomever would like to, ladies first.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. Why, good day, everyone. My name is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I was born in 1825 in Baltimore, Maryland. I actually was born free, believe it or not, and I have a very fine education. I was married. I have one daughter. I was an abolitionist and a suffragist. I also fought for the rights for Indigenous people and was part of the temperance movement as well. I look forward to chatting a little bit more with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
My name is Bishop Richard Allen. I was born enslaved in the year 1760. And actually became a believer while I was enslaved and helped my owner to become a believer. And then I was able to purchase my own freedom. I did some work as a wagon driver for the Patriot Army and some other work. And after that, I decided to become a preacher. And I actually worked at St. George's Methodist Church over here on 4th Street. But there were problems there that led to a walkout from that church, and eventually was able to establish an independent African church denomination, the AME, African Methodist Episcopal denomination.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. A really interesting history. And I think that both of you have really some truly compelling accomplishments. And I kind of wanted to lead with that. Is there, for the both of you, the question, and then we can have some questions from our friends in the audience too. Is there an accomplishment you feel most proud of that you think, or that you're most pleased to have been able to see and be a part of?
Well, if I may be so bold. So the thing that I am the most proud of is that I am a writer. Are there any writers out there or readers? Ooh, wonderful. So I don't know if you know, but I was the first woman of color to actually publish a short story. And I don't know that many people know that. But something else about my writing. I wrote poetry and novels as well as short stories. But one of the things that I am so proud of is using the monies that I made from my writing and also from being on the tour to talk about abolition or the ending of slavery. And I would get paid money. I actually got paid a very nice wage. And I would use those funds to support the Underground Railroad. And I actually lived right here in Philadelphia with Mr. William Still as he was working to free the slaves.
Well, thank you.
I would have to say that what I'm most proud of is to be able to put together an independent African church denomination. You see, very unfortunately, many had the opinions that people of our skin were a little bit less than human. And so at the time that I spent at St. George's Methodist Church, there was an incident where one of us was violently dragged off their knees because they were praying in a place that was for whites only. And we had to raise the money. In fact, I'm also happy to say that after establishing the church, we went under the Methodist denomination, and they wanted to dominate and control everything that we did in the church, and we resisted. And they actually put the church up for public auction. I went to the auction and bought the church back. We also had to deal with a lot of legal challenges that went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But they ruled in our favor in 1816. So we said, well, instead of having just one church, since this problem with racism was pretty rampant in this country, why not start a denomination when we can have many churches? And I was happy also to be appointed as the first bishop of that denomination.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And that's a great thing for us here at the Constitution Center. Really, you're exercising your freedom of religion and embodying those ideals. Now, I know I have more questions. I always have questions, but I would love to be able to hear from some of our friends here. Do any of you have questions? Because if not, I might ask another one for the two of you. And I think I might borrow from a speech that you, Ms. Harper, had delivered at Mother Bethel AME in 1875. It was called The Great Problem to be Solved. And you were telling an audience there about the work that still needed to be done, that there was still a lot of effort on behalf of the rights of women, of African Americans and others. And so I wanted to ask the two of you, what work had you hoped to see? Like what work did you still feel was needed to be done? Like we've talked about some of your proudest accomplishments, but what were the other things that really still motivated you?
Well, for me, it was really the work around suffrage and a woman not being able to vote. So I shared with you all that in my lifetime, I had many different careers. I initially started out as a teacher. I also was a published writer and author, and I also was an abolitionist. But when I met my dear Fenton, that was my husband, I actually used some of the money that I had earned to purchase a farm, and we lived in Ohio. But you see, my husband died in debt. He died in debt. And before he'd been dead for 3 months, the administrators of his estate came and they swept the milk crocks and wash tubs from my very hands. You see, at that time, I was a farmer's wife and making butter for market, another of my professions. But you see, I had no rights. I mean, if he had died, no one would have come into his house or broken up his home or taken away his means of support. You see, justice, it's not fulfilled so long as woman is unequal before the law. And so it was right after this, they took everything from us. I went back onto the talk circuit, I guess, as you may call it. But I was focused then on suffrage and the rights of women and the rights of African-American men and us getting the right to vote. And I don't know if women ever got that right to vote. but I worked very, very hard and diligently with women in the North and in the South, with both white women and Black women. That's what I really would have loved to have seen.
Well, it's a really admirable cause. I think we would agree too. By the way, just checking with our audience. Did we get the right to vote, ladies? Who are women? Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you. Wonderful. Isn't that great to hear?
Yes.
Now, Bishop Allen, what about yourself? And I know in your life you were also involved in organizing conventions of other Black men. Is there anything else you would have liked to see these causes accomplish?
Certainly, freedom for all African Americans, because that was yet undone, and equality for African Americans. You see, I found that getting freedom was relatively easy, but getting equality, well, that was a much bigger issue. You see, during my time, I'm not a citizen of this country. You see, because there was a law passed very early on in this country's history in 1790, and it was called the Naturalization Act. And it actually said, unless your skin is white, you can't be a citizen of this country. And that's very much a difficulty for us free Africans, because in the city, we own homes, we own businesses, we've got some education, but we're not a citizen. And we cannot vote. I would hope that in the future, this country would live up to the words expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We wanted to see all of our people be free. That's why I helped to organize something called the Free Produce Society, where we decided, no, we are not buying any produce that was associated with slavery in any way, shape, or form. And the basement of my church I used as a station for the Underground Railroad.
Wow. Well, this is really, it really drives home the generations of effort that so many had to put together to work toward equality, to work to see themselves included in that idea of we the people. Now, I know I can always keep asking questions, but do my friends in the audience, have you any questions for our speakers here today? We'd be happy to hear from you. I'm sure they would be delighted to hear from you. Feeling a little shy so far. All right. That's okay. Well, I tell you what, folks, I have a question I wanted to ask the two. And as pleased as I am to have you here today with us, I also wanted to ask you about those who are not here, because I know that the two of you have allies and colleagues and many others who you work together to try to fulfill these dreams, this promise of liberty, the promise of the Declaration. Who did you consider among your most important or most cherished close friends and allies?
So I don't know, have you all ever heard of a woman named Harriet Tubman? She was a very dear friend of mine, and I worked with her along with the Stills on the Underground Railroad. I also worked in the abolition movement and the suffrage movement, as well as, oh my goodness, I'm having a moment, with Mr. Frederick Douglass. He was also a very good friend of mine. And also, as it related to my religious upbringing, I was a very religious woman. I really believed in the temperance movement, and also advocated for the African American or the Negro family to be uplifted as well. and also worked in my religious days with
Mm.
Ms. Lucretia Mott, believe it
Oh, wow.
or not.
Yes.
Yes.
Another Philadelphia.
Yes, yes. And I have one more thing. I
Oh, of
just
course.
wanted to add about my accomplishments, things that I was just so proud of. So I actually purchased a home right here in Philadelphia. And if you have a chance, you can run past and see it. It's at 1006 Bainbridge Street. I believe it's still there.
Bishop Allen.
Yes, I would say a gentleman by the name of Absalom Jones. He's actually the leader of the first African-American church in Philadelphia, St. Thomas's African Episcopal Church. And I also worked very closely with him in an organization called the Free African Society. Because those of us who were working and we had money, we contributed a shilling a month to help those in our community, particularly the widows and orphans that didn't have anything. And in addition to that, we worked together during the yellow fever epidemic. Oh, did you ever hear of that?
Ooh.
Oh, many people in this city died. And if you could leave the city, you did. But the Mayor Clarkson reached out to us for our help, and we did so. But very surprisingly, there was a gentleman by the name of Matthew Carey who criticized us for our work, because sometimes when we would help to look after the sick, bury the dead, we would get some compensation for that. And this Matthew Carey accused us of charging exorbitant fees and making all kinds of money. To respond to that, Absalom Jones and I published, and it was the first to be published among African Americans to rebut this, because we actually had a Quaker who kept the books for us, and we discovered that actually we spent a lot more money than we took in. Because the service that many of us provided wasn't for money. It was as a service to God. And we didn't turn people away if they couldn't compensate us. So I would say, yes, Absalom Jones, very, very dear to my heart and should be also recognized.
Now, my friends, I'm going to ask if you have any questions, because I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, but I might ask our question because we've been talking so much about your work. And you talked a little bit about your husband and mentioned your daughter, but could you tell us about your family lives? A little bit about like your personal experiences too.
So as you mentioned, Benton and I, we met in Ohio. It was during the time when I was teaching. He actually had children. He had been married before. And so we created a family life together, and he and I had a daughter named Mary. After he passed and after all the tragic things that happened, I never married again, and Mary also, I never married either, and lived here with me in my home in 1006 Bainbridge Street. I mean, I would have to say I do feel my life was fulfilling, but also as a Negro woman with means, it was also often a very lonely time, as well as many times I would be, for example, in New England, and I would be very well accepted, but I would be the only person there of the Negro race. And so sometimes it was a little bit lonely, to be honest with you.
Sounds understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Bishop Allen.
Well, I was able to marry in the year 1790 a woman named Flora. Oh, such a godly woman, And I loved her so much, and she loved me. The difficulty was that Flora had ill health, and she was not able to bear children. And she had a long period of illness, and that was kind of difficult, but she was still supporting me as best as she could. Well, after she passed away, I did marry another woman by the name of Sarah. And you know, when people talk about Mother Bethel Church, boy, when they say mother, they think of her because she was so involved in people's life and such a loving, caring, supportive woman. And you know, we were able to have 6 children.
Oh, wow.
Great joy.
Wonderful. It's great to hear from you folks, and to know that you have these fulfilling personal relationships too, as well as these great compatriots. Dare I ask, in your, I would say in your quiet times or your personal opportunities, were there other interests you had too in your eras? Because we know that our lives are not always all work, even when the work is so important. But if there was any other interests that you may have had that you felt you could share with us.
Well, I spoke to it a little bit when I talked about our farm that we had. That was so very different than anything else I had ever done in my life. And so just living on the farm and actually working with my hands to have my livelihood was just a very different time. Very, very different time in my life. I actually quite enjoyed it.
Well, I will say I devoted most of my time, free time, reading this Bible and in prayer. Quite often, I'd wake myself up saying Bible verses and in praying. But I will say this as well. You know, when I came to Philadelphia in 1786, now this isn't exactly a hobby. I came in 1786, and you know, you're preaching. Well, I'm not making a lot of money doing that. So I actually worked. And you know, I actually worked as a chimney sweep. Did anybody ever hear of a chimney sweep?
You know what? Oh, I see some hands up.
Yeah. And I started a business doing that. And following that, I became a cobbler, shoemaker. I made shoes. And in my home, I had apprentices that lived with me. Then I taught the trade as well. And in addition to that, I became quite a property owner here in Philadelphia. I started buying up properties here. And I was getting good rental income. And I saved that money because, you know, when they tried to take the church away from me and put up for public auction, I went to the auction and I bought it back. So it's not so much I did other kinds of things. Most of my free time I devoted to prayer, reading the Bible, and the businesses that I had started as well.
That's a really, wow, jack of all trades in many ways, huh? Almost literally.
By his grace, yes,
Yes.
by his grace, amen.
I would love to ask as well, since I asked for folks that you had worked with, collaborated with, as well as those who had helped enrich your personal lives. What about inspirations? Was there anyone maybe you did not perhaps know personally, or any ideals that really you drew from, or either the works of others, or those who, or things that may have motivated you?
Yes. So I did know them.
Oh,
I will say that.
all right.
But they were also very inspirational. So I believe one part of my story that I've not shared with you was that although I was born free in 1825, I became an orphan at the age of 3 and was raised by my aunt and uncle. And living there with them, My uncle actually ran a school, and that's actually where I got and how I got my education, along with my cousin. And it was very fulfilling. But my uncle was an abolitionist. And so when I returned back to my abolition roots, that upbringing and that grounding was really my foundation, for a lot of the work that I did as a part of the abolition movement.
It's great to hear that it was that you had family motivating you to that cause as well, and to be from an early age exposed to these ideas. What about you, Bishop Allen?
Well, a name that pops up really fast with me is a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Rush. You know, he's the signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he was an abolitionist. And he really took a very personal interest in helping my church to be established. In fact, when it was time to write what they call articles of faith for the church, he was instrumental and very helpful in helping that to happen. In addition to that, he really passionately solicited funds for our church. That is why in my church, he has a permanent pew, because he and his family would sometimes come to worship with us at Mother Bell.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear. I was not familiar with that connection between the two of you. Now, I think we are nearly out of time, but I did have, unless putting out, we do have a question from one of our friends. Jenna can get a microphone for you, so we might hear you, since I believe we have some folks joining us online as well.
I have a question for, I think both of you, but I'm trying to remember the second one. But for you, can we find your first writing or your first published material today? And can you remember what made you want to write or want to publish something?
Yes, you can find all of my writings, my poetry and books. I believe they're still probably still in print. I would hope. I would hope so, yes. So when I lived with my uncle and aunt, at the age of 13, you would have to have a trade. And so I went and I worked for a family that owned a bookstore. And I became their nurse maid and did minor mending and sewing and stitching for them. But the woman of the house realized how much of a reader I was. And she actually encouraged me not only to read during my downtime, but she also encouraged me to write as well. And so I had a wonderful, teenage life of mending and sewing and reading and writing. My first book of poetry, I was age 21. And my novel was The Two Offers. And so I wrote about the conditions of slavery, but I also wrote about everyday things in women's lives at the time.
I'm sorry, I think I had just to refresh myself before speaking, I just read one of your poems was Bury Me in a Free Land.
Yes.
But was that question for Bishop Allen as well? If there's any writing or anything of his too? Yeah, if there's anything we can go to learn more about you.
Well, yes, I did mention about the publication I did with Absalom Jones concerning refuting the false charges of the Free African Society during the yellow fever epidemic. However, in addition to writing those things, I wrote hymns. In fact, the hymnal I wrote was the first hymnal that was published for an African-American church. And another thing that I'm very proud of having a hand in writing, you see, in 1817, there was a meeting at my church to discuss whether or not we were going to go back to Africa, because that was being promoted by people like Thomas Jefferson and many of the other religious leaders here. And we talked about it, and then we came together to make a resolution that we were going to send out to the other African-American organizations. And it went like this: whereas our ancestors, not of choice, were the first settlers to make to successfully cultivate the wilds of America, we, their descendants, feel ourselves entitled to participate in the blessings of her luxuriant soil. And we will never voluntarily separate ourselves from the slave population of this country. They are our brethren.
Wow, powerful. I don't know, do we have time for any more questions? Or we see we have another hand up. All right, I think we have time for one more, right, Jenna?
I think so.
All right, wonderful.
Bishop Allen,
Yes.
You said that you had 6 children. I just wanted to know that any of them followed in your footsteps.
Oh,
Well, yes, they did. In fact, one of them actually went to Haiti. Because in Haiti, many African Americans were invited to come there, because when Haiti became a new government, they wanted to form a partnership with African Americans to develop Haiti. And my son went.
wonderful. Well, I want to thank both of you for sharing just so much wonderful information with us today. I feel like I learned a lot. I hope we did as well. I know for those of us who are here in person, I hope you may be able to stick around for a moment if anyone else has any questions once we have the microphones off. But thank you all once again for joining us, folks. We are delighted to have had you today. And thanks to Francis Ellen Watkins Harper and Bishop Richard Allen.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to our friends from MAWA as well for making this day possible here. As I hope we enjoyed the rest of our visit here today at the Constitution Center. We have a lot of other wonderful programs, activities in our exhibits. Thank you, folks. Oh, got my mic off? Yes. Okay.